Hey folks, it's Mark from Pixel Hobo here. I'm just down by a river close to my house because it's nice and quiet. We've got a little bit of wind, so please bear with me. But I wanted to explain a little bit about the shoot I'm going to do tonight. It's a time-lapse shoot using the MIOPS Trigger. And I'm going to explain it here because I didn't want to battle too much with the noise in Yokohama City tonight, where I'm going to be doing the shoot. To start with, equipment-wise, I'm going to be using a Canon 5D Mark III. On that, I've got a Nikon lens. It is the 14-24 f2.8 GED. And it's operated aperture wise by a little lever, and you can see this, that's aperture wide open, that's aperture closed. So whilst it's not numerically accurate, it can get you pretty much ballpark to the setting that you want. From there you just obviously regulate it with ISO and shutter speed. So that's how this particular lens camera combination works. The focal piece of equipment for tonight is the MIOPS Trigger. Now this little gadget, it sits on your hot shoe. You've got a hot shoe adapter there. It sits in your camera hot shoe, and what it is, it allows you to use different scenarios to trigger your camera, whether that's time-lapse, sound trigger, lighting trigger, laser trigger, but we're going to focus more on the time-lapse. I'm going to show you how to quickly set that up. And then later on tonight, I'm going to show you how to trigger this using a smart app via my iPad. We're ready to put place the MIOPS Trigger in place. You have the hot shoe adapter here, and that just slides into the hot shoe location on the camera, like so. So there you are, locked in place. You have a communication cable in order for the MIOPS to be able to discuss or to talk with the camera. You just unlift this strip here. That plugs into here. And the other end simply plugs into your shutter release cable port on your camera. Okay? And so now you're set up to go. Okay, so with the MIOPS in place, the way it works, there's going to be a bit of a glare at the moment, so I'm going to explain the menu system a bit later. But very simply, you turn the MIOPS on here. Okay, you have an indicating LED here that comes on when you turn it on. It says that the camera is connected, and then when you initially set it on, it comes immediately into different scenarios, the first one being lighting. In order to get to time-lapse, which is where we're going to go tonight, you skip through sound and then you come on to time-lapse. And you'll be able to see the menu a lot easier tonight when I'm programming the shoot. But you have three parameters: your interval, your exposure and your limit. So your interval, whatever interval it is that you want between shots, how many exposures you want when that interval is reached, and what your quantity limit is. So if you know how many shots you want, you can plug that in, and then eventually what will happen is when you set go, the MIOPS will count down each shot, and when you get to your limit, it will cease the time lapse. Well, we're pretty much good to go. That's all the gear set up. We're going to head on down to Yokohama, and in order to do that, we're going to take one of the local trains. Now, it normally takes about 10 minutes for us to get down there, maybe a bit more, 15-20 minutes. But let's see if we can do it just a little bit faster. It's always worth to have a bit of fun. If you've got a camera in your bag, take it out, have a blast. We're in the middle of the business district of an area called Sakuragicho, which is close to Yokohama. And this crossing down here, this is going to be the focal junction for the time-lapse tonight. Okay, so you might be wondering how I'm going to trigger this time-lapse, and quite simply, we live in a smart age, may as well use a smart device. here I am with my iPad. If I skip over to here, you can see here I've got the MIOPS app to run the program. I fired it up, I've got my MIOPS turned on, and you can see it here on the pad on the screen. I just click on there, and up along on the left hand side of the screen comes all of the options for the different scenarios. I'm on time-lapse, so I select time-lapse, and then I get fed the options here. My interval, okay, in minutes and seconds. I only want a short interval, so I'm going to go for 4 seconds. I then go to exposure, how many exposures on each incident. 1 exposure is going to take 1 photograph. And then on limit, I put this in earlier on, but how many photographs do I want to take a maximum? I'm shooting 48 frames a second for video, and I want to shoot 20 seconds. So that's 960 frames limit, okay? And that should take me into the dark hours. Having done the math before, this will take me into the dark hours, and I'll get my nice little streaky lights. So all I need to do to start this is to push start here. Okay, now I need to move out of the way because I am in the way of the lens. So you can see we're in place, and I've got the MIOPS trigger firing. I'm going to lift up here so you can see the countdown. Every time it takes a picture, the green LED will show on the top, and you'll see it count down on the screen as we go. And you'll see I've already adjusted my time lapse. I'm now on 1/6 of a second, and the light drops off drastically around about between, just as at dusk, the light drops off so fast. I call it the mad 15. It's the mad 15 minutes where you've just got this huge amount of light shift, and your shutter speed goes from what it was 1/6, and we could even hit 2 seconds with these settings. And once I get to 2 seconds, what I then do is I just retain the shutter and manipulate the time using the ISO. So I'll increase the ISO so as not to go on a shutter longer than 2 seconds. Well guys, it is now 7 o'clock local time. We just finished. Ended up on a 2.5 second shutter, ISO 800, and everything good. You can see that the MIOPS trigger is now showing, it's gone back to the setting of the time-lapse. 960, waiting to go again. I'm not going to go again because I've now got to battle the traffic and get back home, see my family, and we'll start editing in the morning, at which time I will do some computer screen recording so I can take you through all of the editing process I use for this particular time-lapse. Okay, welcome folks. As you can see, I've got no files, no software open at the moment. I'm going to show you how I edit my time-lapse sequences. You were with me last night when I was filming or photographing the time-lapse in this location here. This is a shot that I took from a different time-lapse from that same position. And what I want to try and do is to get the final video file looking something like this. So without further ado, I'll show you the software I'm using. I'm going to use Adobe Lightroom, so I'll go ahead and open that. And I'm also going to use, to edit my time-lapse, the LRTImelapse 4 plugin. So I'll go ahead and open that. Here you can see my, my Lightroom library. Let's just get down to the bottom here, and I'll lay that out how I want that. In the meantime, LRTImelapse is opening. What I have done is I've imported all of the files from last night into my hard drive just to save time, so that I can take you through those steps when LRTImelapse opens. And I believe it should be open now. Yep, there we go. There's your interface for LRTImelapse. You can see, let's close this down at the moment. I'll take you through every step to import and show you the time lapse that I shot last night. Okay, so let's just make that a little bit bigger. Let's make all of the frames, the panes a little bit bigger so you can see exactly what's going on. Okay, so to start with, okay, first of all I'm going to go over to my volumes. I'm going to find the location where I have my files kept. Where are they? In volumes, that's Window 2, time-lapse sequences, transport, there we go, so it should be in there. There we go, and I've called it MIOPS Crossing because I was shooting it with the MIOPS Trigger, and this edit is related to the time-lapse shot with the MIOPS Trigger, so I'll go ahead and you can see it's indicated here 962 images and with a duration of 20 seconds. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click that, and what you're going to see is all of the images are going to come up into this main pane here, and it shows you all of the parameters for each image or each frame of this time lapse. So you've got here your aperture. Now you'll see on the aperture with this it says NA, and that is because I'm using a Nikon lens on a Canon body. There is no electronic communication between the lens and the camera, so what I have to do as part of the procedure on this edit is I have to tell it what aperture I was on, and I'll show you how I do that in a minute. Next to that you're going to see the shutter speed, and you'll see we started off at 1/13 of a second on ISO 100. So all of this information here will allow you to see as we went down through the time lapse. Here you can see on frame 452, for example, the interval is always 5 seconds. That was my intervalometer. The shutter speed here is 2 seconds, and my ISO is 640. And you can see that we ended up at 2.5 seconds for ISO 800. Okay. Now what's happening now, and it's going to take a bit of a while, so I'll come back and I'll re-record again in a minute, is it's loading every one of these images. And there's a little indicator here, this blue jagged line that shows you the luminosity of each frame as it gets loaded, and you can see here that it's a bit jumpy and staccato, and I'll have a clearer idea, and I'll show you how that ends up when it loads this first run of images. And what you will notice is when I play that back, it's going to be crazy strobing effect, and this is all part of the editing process. I'm going to show you how to go from this crazy staccato lighting from all of the different settings on ISO and the shutter speed. I'm going to show you how to go from that to getting a nice easy transition from day to night. This is actually a workflow called the Holy Grail, or the technique called the Holy Grail, and you'll see that I'm going from daylight, heavy shadows, into night with dark skies, brighter streets because of the lighting, and you'll see exactly how I make that transition in the final piece through this workflow. So let's wait for this to load, and then I'll take you forward from there. And so here you can see we're pretty much coming up to the end of the import. You can see I'm using the raw files by the file name here, CR2, from a Canon 5D Mark III. And what you'll notice here is at the beginning, the light levels, the changes are quite drastic, and that's because obviously we're going from daylight to nighttime. And as you see here, this is the area that I was on about when I was shooting the time lapse, is that you get this very prominent zone where the light changes are made, and you can see that by all of these changes, all of these peaks and troughs, they relate to changes that have been made within the shutter speed and the ISO. And what you'll notice down here is when the light starts to become its regular standard nighttime, there are some changes, but these are not caused by the camera. These are probably caused by the light that enters the camera, whether from headlights, tail lights, or other, and you'll see that those change at different times, and that's probably to synchronize with the arrival of more headlights from either one of these two directions into the camera. So that will explain this light changes that you can see in this part of the video. All right, well, I'm going to show you what we start with. Okay, I'm going to press play here so you can get a pre-visualization of what we've got at the moment. And you can see all of the light changes, the pumps, you know, all of the increasing of, I mean, this is not something that you would include in a movie. You can see the light pumping, the light levels going crazy. But this gives you an idea of how it's going to end up. Okay, and what you can see is raw. So you've got a very red, if we come here, you'll notice that we've got a very red kind of tinge to the image, and that's because the street lighting is halogen, so you've got that that reddish kind of warm glow to the lighting. And again, that's something that we can figure out or that we can resolve with the edit. Okay, so I'm going to go on and explain to you what it is we're going to do right here. In LRTImelapse 4.3 Pro, you have different workflows. You have up here, you have your basic workflow, your visual workflow, or your long-term workflow. Now, I don't bother with long-term workflow, video workflow, or other tools. I'm more interested in this visual workflow here, and this is the workflow that we use when we shoot, as this scene is, what is termed the Holy Grail technique, and that is going from daylight to nighttime transitions in time with the view eventually, once the edit's done, to having that nice slow easy deterioration of light, the increasing of the night ambient, and the streaky lights with the traffic. Okay, and the way that I start that out is I've ingested all of my footage. The program itself has evaluated everything. It's given me this line. Okay, and now what I want to do is I want to create some keyframes for editing. Okay, and all you do with LRTImelapse 4.3 is you follow the instructions in the control panel up here at the top from left to right, and you've got a little arrow in between each step that shows you, and with hints on the buttons as to what it is that you have to do in order to edit your sequence. So it's all pretty straightforward. Okay, so step one, keyframe wizard. Okay, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I told you about with regards to the aperture. I don't have aperture control on the camera. I have to set it manually, and so I'm being asked here. You seem to have changed camera parameters during shooting, which is a holy grail method. And in order to be able to use matched total exposures later in Lightroom, an aperture value needs to be added to the EXIF data now. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to answer yes, I do want to add aperture information. I'll click on that, and then I have a drop down menu of aperture values relating that I can choose to select that relate to that sequence. Now, I know that I was shooting around f16, so I'm going to go ahead and choose that. That gets taken, and then I OK that. And then what that gives me is a luminance chart, a line that shows my lighting, my luminance, and it goes from the top here down to the dark hours, a very nice S, and you can see that that pretty much mirrors my chart here that shows all of the changes for my ISO and my shutter speed. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a number of keyframes, and what I always do is I'll just select 4. What I want to do, and I'll explain what this does a bit later on, I've added 4 keyframes to this sequence here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I can change that if I want. If I go to 6, you'll see it adds 2 more here. So now we have 6. I'm going to stay with 4. Okay, and what these are for, basically, you'll see all of these changes here. Now, if I tried to pick a keyframe on each one of these changes and make the changes in relative to each change in iris and ISO, it's going to be a hell of a job, and I'm going to be there for hours on end. So what I choose to do is I choose to have 4 keyframes, and basically what I'm trying to do is I'm going to edit the look of the video starting from the beginning, and I've got 4 points of reference throughout the course of the video where I can change the look so that over the course of the video all of these staccato motions relating to ISO and shutter change are ironed out, in effect ironed out. They're smoothed out between these keyframes, and I'll show you how I do that with Lightroom a little bit later on. So I've selected my keyframes here. Okay, I can go ahead and close that. The Holy Grail wizard. Okay, this allows me to change the light path, as it were, between the start and the end points. Simply by what I always try to do is I try to get it so that the start and final indicators are more or less along that yellow mean line here. It doesn't matter about the whether it, I term this as exposure, and it doesn't matter if it goes under or over, because you can edit that out later with Lightroom. It's just a personal preference, and I'm sure there's lots of, in editing there's lots of personal preferences. So let's go ahead and stop that. Okay, and to close that window. Next we save, and what this is doing now is this is going to save all of the changes that I've made here. It's going to save that to the EXIF file of the image. Okay, so you can already see that the editing is starting to take place. Okay, and once that loads, once it gets up to here, there's one more step. Let me just reduce this. This panel, and you'll see why I do this in a minute. Again, this is a lot of this is personal preference, so we're just waiting for that to load. Okay, and the next step, quite simply, is to take this button here and drag it down into Lightroom. So I'm going to do that. I just literally grab that button, drag it down, and bring it into my Lightroom in the library panel. And then what that's going to do, that is going to bring and show me all of the images in that sequence. Basically it's going to drag the sequence, or the whole library of images into Lightroom. And what you'll notice once I edit, let's select all, hold on, highlight, edit, select all, okay, and down here import, and once I import you'll notice that we've got 4 little stars here, and these stars relate to every one of those 4 keyframes. They're shown with 4 stars. These are the main keyframes, but what you also will see are other images in the library with stars on them, and these are other images that have had changes made throughout the duration of the shoot last night. But the only ones that I'm interested in are the only ones that will be edited are the ones with the 4 stars. Okay, so let's wait for all of the images to be uploaded. You'll see here at the moment I'm on 300 in the library now. Remember, we shot 960 images. We're on 900. There we go. We're fully loaded. Okay, and there's your final keyframe there. Okay, so now all that remains is to edit, and let's have a look at how we do that. Down here you'll notice in Lightroom we have these this menu bar here for LRTImelapse, LRTImelapse 4. You have different options here. You have got your full sequence, which is what we're on at the moment, and LRTImelapse 4 keyframes. Now if I was to select that, what you're going to see here, we're still in library, but all it does, it filters out all of the keyframes that are the 4 main keyframes that I created when I imported the images. And what you'll see, what I'm going to do now is basically edit these files so that I can, when I string them all together, I can create the final look for the final outcome of the video. Now in order to do that I need to edit, so I'll go into each one up here, develop, This is my editing options for within Lightroom. Okay, so this is the first keyframe. You can see the sky is nice. Too much shadow maybe. Let's try and make some. Let's do step one. And again, all editing is personal preference. If I do something that other people wouldn't do, well, you know, that's their preference. This is how I prefer to edit my sequences, and I hope at the end of it we'll come out with a nice product. So anyway, the first thing I normally do is I'll crop. Okay, I want to keep it at 16:9, and this is not going to do anything other than change the aspect ratio of the raw image. I'm still going to have a 4K file at the end of the day. Okay, I don't like particularly this bar here. There isn't any motion in this. Is a static shot. If it was a motion shot, then having this move actually adds some kind of dynamic to it. But seeing as it's static, I want to get rid of that. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to crop it to where I can't see that anymore. In fact, I might have a little bit still off-putting, because down here we get some nice motion. What I can also do is this. We can get rid of that a bit. Let's have a little bit down here. I just think that that's going to be a little bit off-putting if I'm that. Okay, well, executive decision, we're going to keep some of it in, because what I want is to keep this area here. So let's just, yeah, there you go. All right, that'll do. Anyway, so that's the crop. So we're going to work with that crop there. We've got this little bar here, but hey. Okay, the next thing, what I normally do is clarity. I'll add some clarity to the base image, and I normally work around about 36 points. Vibrance, again, I'll pump that up a little bit. I don't put, I hope, too much color into it, and I'll always leave the saturation maybe by about 6%, just to give it a nice look. But we can do the greater details for that later. Okay, with the highlights, I'm normally quite drastic with those. With the whites, I'll come down 50, and the highlights also. And it will make it a little bit dark, but that's fine, because what I do is I'll offset that by pumping up a little bit the shadow, and that will give us a bit more light into the darker areas of the image. And I think you can see already that it's starting to look a little bit cool. Contrast, I always normally set around about 7 points. I don't do massive contrast, but I find that suits the image, the final image, fine enough. What I may do also is there's a couple of points here that I don't really like. Maybe my sensor needs a clean, so I'll get rid of those, get rid of that, and that. Now you'll see that it takes a reference point to get rid of that spot, and it will retain that reference spot throughout the course of the time lapse, and I'll show you how it does that in a very short moment. Geez, I need to clean my sensor. Anyway, that's good. Alright, cool. So we'll get rid of those. You can see the spots are gone. Okay, so we're clear on that. Okay, I'm happy with that for just the basic elements of the edit. Okay, the next thing I'll go into is the hue, saturation, lightness. I just want to bump up a little bit the aqua, the light blue sky there a little bit. Let's see how we get on with that. Yeah, there we go. Let's get a nice little. Cool. Okay. And then let's close that. Let's put a little bit of detail. This is again, I sharpen, and what I normally do is I'll go to 75, 76. My radius I normally put 1.2. Detail I'll bump that up to 66. And the masking I'll put on 14. Okay. Noise reduction, although there isn't too much noise, I'd normally just set this, and then it's universal throughout the duration of the time lapse. And the same with the colour. Call me a creature of habit. I normally stick to the same kind of settings. I found over the time that they've worked out okay. Alright, now here we are. We have the first image. I'm going to go ahead and save the settings on that, but let me just hold on. Okay, so up here for the edit, we're on develop at the moment. All of the settings that I've just changed now, the easy way to do that, settings, copy settings. That's going to bring me up with this option menu here. Okay, all of the aspects that I've actions that I've made here, I can simply copy all of those. I tend not to copy the exposure. You can do if you want to, but I prefer not to. I copy that. It's kept all of the changes that I've made in this image, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to now call up the second image, which is this one here, and I'm going to apply settings, paste settings. I'm going to apply all of the previous settings from that first image to this image here, and you can see how that's changed. It applies the crop, it applies all of the color changes, the lighting changes, etc, etc. Now at this period of time, I think that this image doesn't look too far off what was true. Maybe a little bit, you can see there's a bit of a red tinge to it coming in already, whether that's caused by the sunset or the introduction of some halogen. I'm just going to change that a little bit. I'm going to take down the temperature, make it a little bit cooler, try and get rid of that red. Yeah, maybe that's a bit too much. There we go. I think that's fine. Let's come down maybe just a little bit. There we go. So I'll come down a little bit. Everything else in that, I think, for me at the moment looks fine. Okay, the big difference is going to come up on the next frame. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead again because I made that change here with regards to the temperature. I'm going to go ahead, copy the settings, leave everything the same, copy that, call up the next image. Okay, and this is where things are going to get drastic. I'm going to now paste the settings. Takes a while. There you go. And this is where now we're going to make quite a few changes. You'll see that the lights here are just, this particular area unfortunately is plagued by this set of lights here, but hopefully people will be more focused on the motion of the images of the cars and the lights rather than focusing too much on this here. But we're going to go ahead and make some changes here. I'm going to try and reduce the harshness of that lighting area there. Let's put the highlights down a bit more. Okay. And clarity's fine, black shadows, that's all fine. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to come back down, I'm going to back off on the colour a bit. You can see it was a bit red, now we're getting that really nice cobalt blue. So yeah, by using the small iris you get this really nice kind of effect from the lights. I'm zoomed in 10 times here, so you actually start to see the pixels and the noise, the very close-up detail. Click back out, we can see the overall look, as it were, of the image. I'm happy with it. We get the nice lights in the buildings up here. The sharpness is fine, the colour is just right. I really love the cobalt blue that comes up into the sky here, and obviously the main focus or the main goal was to get this these streaky lines. Okay, so I'm going to take all of those settings that I've just made, I'm going to copy those, and we have one more. I didn't touch the exposure, so I'm going to copy that. We have one more image to apply this to, and you can start to see what it is that I'm achieving here. Paste settings. We're in the dark of night here, and you can see now it might be a little bit dark, so I'm going to just brighten up this image a little bit, but you can see now that the sky has pretty much gone completely black. Very much got the nighttime feel to this final frame. Like I said, it's a little bit dark, so I'm going to come back off and so where was I on that? That was fine. I'm going to come back and bring in some highlights a little bit, bring in some whites a little bit, and maybe even, because I was shooting raw, I may even just bump up the exposure by 5% or 10%. Let's have a look. There we go, 10%. Yeah, I think that's okay. By a tenth of a stop, sorry. I think it's fine. I might just back down a little bit because you get now the overriding influence of the halogen at night time. So I'm just going to, yeah, I think that looks pretty damn cool. I think that looks okay. Okay, and that was the final frame in the series of 4. If you go through here, that's for frame 1. That's keyframe 2. So that's your main drastic change, is between that look and that look. Okay, and this is how we end up. So I'm pretty sure that transition is pretty cool. So we're going from, sorry about the police car behind me, we're going from this look to this, that's pretty drastic, and then to this. Okay, so let's see now how we go about applying that to LRTImelapse and how we get the final film. Okay, so what I need to do, I've made all of these changes, so I need to save those changes in the EXIF information, the XMP data of the files. And what I do by that is I'll select library. You'll notice down here still that we're on the 4-star keyframes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and select all. I use the mouse clicks just to make it easy for people who don't do the keyboard shortcuts. So edit, select all, and up here you have your heading metadata. Drop down to save metadata to files. I've made changes to these files, I now need to save that. So I'll click that, and you can see up here it saved the metadata to the files. Now what I generally tend to do now is I will then go down to the keyframe setting and I'll select the full sequence. So we get the full sequence come up here, and you can see the difference between the first frame here, the first frame of the sequence. With it being a 4-star keyframe, it's already cropped. Its neighbor, no changes, uncropped. Okay, and I'm going to show you now the next step, which requires that we go back to LRTImelapse. Okay, so to go back to LRTImelapse, simply we just click on the icon at the bottom. There we are, and we're now back to where we started before going into Lightroom. We've made changes to the metadata. We've saved that to the 4-star keyframes from Lightroom. In order to recognize those changes, we need to reload the sequence, and it does that. This is reloading all of the EXIF file and information up here. You can see the progress bar there. Okay, and now auto transition. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. This is where the magic happens. By clicking on this button here, what's happening now is LRTImelapse is taking the information from each one of these 4 keyframes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and what it's doing is it's calculating the changes that need to be made in order to create a smooth flowing transition of each individual frame between the keyframes. So when we've done the edit for the keyframes, you'll notice that we checked at the end this keyframe at the beginning, this one, this is where the drastic happened, and that corresponds here with all of the settings you can see on the luminance charts and all of the other charts. Okay, the drastic setting between, or aesthetic difference between this frame and this frame, and what it's doing now, or what it done when it auto transitioned is it made all of the calculations to make sure that every single frame of this time lapse transitions uniformly and nicely and smoothly without any of the light jumps, without any of the bumps and whatever, into a nice easy transition. Okay, and that is the beauty of this software, so that it takes all of that hard work and makes it, simplifies it simply with a click of the button. Okay, and now I'll save that auto transition information, and you can see that it's a little bit harder, or taking a little bit longer, because it's figuring out here all of the changes that need to be made with every frame between the keyframes. Okay, so as the progress bar gets to the end, all of the information, the EXIF, the XMP information for each one of the images of this time lapse is being changed in order for it to attain that smooth transition. Okay, coming on to the last segments. This step here, these last few steps here, they take a bit of time, but it's all worth it in the end. What we have here is pre-visualization. This will basically now take all of the information that we've just created with the auto transition, and what it's going to do is it's going to map the path of light and the final aesthetic of the time lapse, and it's going to show me that when it gets to the end of this line. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to let it do its magic. It's going to take a while, and we'll come back just at the end when we can see what has happened. This basically gives us a pre-visualization of what the final time lapse is going to look like, and at that point, if we do need to make any changes, we can do so without having to go to the trouble of making the time lapse, seeing there's a problem, and then going back and trying to fix it again. So this is something that is very much a benefit to the workflow and the streamlining of the workflow. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause at the moment, but I'll come back when we're at the end of this segment here. You see now that the first visual preview has run its course. It's mapped out the time lapse light path, as it were, the luminance path here. I'm going to go ahead and run that, and here you can see that a lot of those massive jumps and bumps that we had at the beginning have now been ironed out. The transition of light is a lot more comfortable, a lot more easy, a lot more pleasing to the eye, but still at the beginning there are a couple of very faint, especially here, you can see there are a couple of, and I'll run that again. If you look for this point here, you'll see at the beginning, look up at the light, you can see that dim of light right there, and that, what we can do, we can step through frame by frame, and you can see there is that big change in light visual here, and you can see, where are we, there we are, in between these two this change of light here. It might not be too discernible when you go frame by frame, but when you play, if we scrub back and play again, there is that very boom there. You see that almost like a pulse of light. Okay, we'll play that again. Yeah, there you go. You see that one? Okay. Okay, so to counteract that, all we do is we go up here and we have a visual deflicker. Okay, that drops down, and what that's going to do is that is going to further iron out all of the changes between the existing light levels that are on this already rendered time lapse, and it's going to make it, you can see by the green line here, as opposed to the pink line, it's now figuring out or doing all of the math that will allow it to further render or change the XMP data of the file in order to accomplish smooth transitions between this light here. Okay, the green line you can see is a very smooth transition between all of the changes that you see on this pink line here. Okay, and this is the visual luminance line. Okay, so this is what you see, that the amount of light that you see. Okay, And so up here you have the control for that. If you can make it as drastic or as clear as you want. You don't want to go too crazy with it. I generally tend to leave it around about 10, which is the default. But if there is a sharp step to the one that we saw there, I will normally then further go to about 20. Okay, so we'll put it on there. Okay, and then from there you press apply, and again this now is going to go through the same kind of process as building the visual luminance line with the deflicker treatment. Again, it's going to take a bit of time in order to do that. We'll just press save so that we've got all of that information. Now once it's saved, it will then go to start building that deflicker line. There you can see this one, the visual luminance line disappearing. And again, what's going to happen, you've got this spinning line here. What's going to happen is it's going to rebuild that luminance line, taking into consideration the amount of deflicker that you have applied with that setting, and it's going to build what we hope will be the final time lapse for this particular sequence. Okay, so again, I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to let this one render, and I'll come back when we're done, and then we'll go into the final step for the edit with LRTImelapse and Adobe Lightroom, sorry, once this has finished rendering. We're coming up to the end of this final deflickering phase, and what's interesting here on the visual luminosity, you can see the pink light progress line here, almost done, but where the frames, in relation to the frames, individual frames, you can see where the calculations have been made to change that luminosity in order for the deflicker to take effect. What's going to happen in a couple of seconds is the deflicker is going to be final, and we can take one last look at, or final look in LRTImelapse Pro, the final render that we've got from this program. And if I go back to the start line, there we are, press play, you can see now that that transition, there's a tiny, almost imperceivable little bump of light at the beginning, but for the most part you've got a very nice and stable and steady transition from day to night. And all that remains for me now is to render this final video. In order to do that, we go back to Adobe Lightroom. Now, the last time we were here, we made the changes to the keyframes, okay, and we've got the keyframes still indicated by the 4 stars, and you'll notice that these are cropped, the neighbors are not cropped. All the changes that we've made in LRTImelapse Pro need to be transported into Adobe Lightroom before we can render the final video, but it's a lot simpler than you think, because all of those changes have been made to the metadata of the file. So if we go simply edit, select all, that selects all of the images, the 962 images of this sequence, and then simply metadata, read metadata from files. So now you'll see the progress bar up here. It does take a bit of time, but all it's going to do now, and you'll see how that takes effect, all of the information for the metadata, for the edits that we've done, is going to be relayed to the images we see here. And you can see that happening because look at the progress of the images here. They're taking on the crop of the original keyframe, and all of the changes are going to be made to each one of these images throughout the whole of the sequence. So once that's finished, this progress bar at the top will come to the end. That means then that all of the images in the sequence, you can see here they're still waiting to adopt the crop, but as we go through the sequence, you'll see that that takes effect. All of the changes, here we go, all of the changes will become apparent in the aesthetic of the represented thumbnails, and from there, when that's done, we go to the final export, and I will show you how we do that whilst we just wait for this progress bar up here to come to the end. So now you can see the Lightroom progress bar. Everything, all of the metadata has now been saved to all of the files. As we go through each one of the, if we drag this down, you're going to see that those changes will be made to the frames. It's just a visual delay, but all of the metadata has been changed. So all we need to do now is to save our final project, our final time lapse, and by doing that we've got all of the frames selected at the moment. So we just say File, Export, and here we have a drop down menu for LRTImelapse. We can choose to select the frames that are how we're going to build the frames for the final product. Okay, I'm going to elect simply to use JPEGs. It's still going to have 4K resolution, but I'm not planning any further edits. So now that all the changes have been made with regards to the aesthetic, I don't need to make any further changes. So I'm going to keep the files as small as possible and have them encoded as JPEGs. If you want to have them encoded as TIFF, you can, but they're going to be a lot bigger, occupy a lot more space, and that can be either in 8-bit or 16-bit. Now I'm going to suggest I go with JPEGs 4K, and then simply all we do here is we set the output path for that sequence. Okay, so let's select something here, and what this is going to do is going to build a folder with those final images in them. So I'm going to put, let's say, Tokyo time-lapse. No, that's the other one. Oh, we can, yeah, Tokyo. Okay, so MIOPS crossing, that's in that one. I'm going to create another folder, MIOPS final, MIOPS edit. Okay, let's create that. And that then is going to be my reference file for the final video build of the time lapse by LRTImelapse Pro. So go ahead and OK that. I'm going to give it a name. Let's say MIOPS. MIOPS crossing. I'm not the best typer. Crossing lapse. Okay, cool. Oh, MIOPS lapse, how's that? There we go. Okay, and then export. Now this will come up, all of the images filed, it's preparing for export. This is going to be a lengthy process, so I'll have to come back when the build is finished. But this, I'll just explain what's going to happen here. It's preparing everything for export, and now basically what it's going to do, it's going to take every one of these frames and it's going to create a JPEG file of that frame that will be used to build the final time-lapse video. And you can see up here, rendering 962 photos for LRTImelapse, and it's going through the number counting, 3 at the moment. That will change in a minute, go to frame number 4, and so on and so forth. There you go, number 4. And so on and so forth, all the way up through to 920. Okay, now that's going to take a bit of a while, so you're going to have to love it and leave it for a while, but I will come back when we're done to go on to the final phase of getting this time lapse onto our timeline. Okay. You can see now that we're pretty much at the end of the export by Adobe Lightroom. We're at 261, there's one more to go. And once this render is finished of all of the frames, what's going to happen is LRTImelapse will automatically pop up. Here we are, and it then gives me the render options for my final video file. You can see that the task is to render the file, the indicator file that's been created by the export of the files from Adobe Lightroom, and it suggests the output file and location for that final film. some of the codec settings here. For this one I'm going to use ProRes, the ProRes codec. I'm going to output the master file at 4K or 3840 by 2160 pixels. My final frame rate is 48 frames per second for the master. The speed is going to be 1:1. My quality level I'll put very high. I don't like ultra high because I think it looks too false. The color sampling is going to be 422. Motion blur, it can cover up a few of the rough edges, so I generally tend to keep that at medium. I don't add any additional sharpening, and there's no copyright overlay because this is a master. If I want to do any overlays on a project after that, then I'll transcode the master to whatever I want and then copyright overlay on that. So all that needs to be done after this is press render, and what you're going to see in the bottom of the main screen for LRTImelapse Pro is an indicator for the number of frames that are being rendered. So here you go, it's counting now. It's frame 9, 10, 11, 12. That's going to go all the way to 962. And when that's done, I will get a little sound, a little ping, ping, and that will indicate to me that the file has been written. From there, and for the sake of this tutorial, there is one more step to take, but that is done with an encoding, small encoding software, and again I'll show you how I get my final film once this stage here has been complete. So I'm going to let this one render, and we'll come back when we're done with it. We're coming up now quickly to the end of the render from LRTImelapse. This now is working on the final frames of the video. Once that's done, I should get a confirmation bell that the complete film has been rendered. We should get that in a minute. Hey, there you go. So that signifies that we are now done with the edit. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to go and close down Lightroom. We don't need that anymore. And we don't need LRTImelapse anymore. We're done with this. But before I close it down, I just want to show you guys who may be interested. Up here, I've gotten rid of all of these are the main overlays that you can see that relate to the visual luminance, the chroma, the amount of light, the deflickering that's been done, and those are indicated when I access my overlays here. Okay, if I want to disable that, I can, but I can then decide to enable white balance temperature, for example, so you can see the white balance temperature here, the graph showing the changes made to that. The highlights, the graph that changes the highlights. Here we have the shadows. Okay, so there's your shadows up there. Okay, all of these layouts you can just, yep, and here's your whites. Okay, so all of these graphs are just to show you guys that you can, whatever it is that you want to take a look at, you can check it out through graphs on here. Okay, or you can have nothing like that. Okay, cool. Anyway, we're done with LRTImelapse, so I'm going to close that down. Quit. Okay, and now I use this little plug-in here. It's called MPEG Stream Clip. I got turned on to it a number of years ago when I used to do a lot of Final Cut Pro editing for some underwater stuff that I used to do, and I always go by the old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it. This software, I don't think it's available anymore, but this little plugin is amazing. It was designed to transcode MPEG media, video files, HD. I used it when HDV was all the rage, and it's continued to work, so I continue using it. Anyway, I'm going to tell it now to open up the file that we've just created. So I'm just going to go open file, and from there it's going to allow me to go into my where are we, time-lapse transporter, there we go. This is the file that we've just created, okay, with LRTImelapse Pro. Here it is in the folder. What I want to do now, this is the 4K master, and what I want to do is I want to create a 1080p version that I'm going to include in the edit that you guys, that this film is going to be a part of. Okay, and so to do that, very simply, I go File, Export as QuickTime, and here you have all of your presets and all, everything that you want to have to make that final file in 1080p. I'm going to go for Apple ProRes 422. Quality, I'm just going to bash it up to 100. Sound, MPEG-4 AAC, let's go, what is it, 48 kilohertz at 192 is fine. Okay, we're going to go 1920 1080, which means it's going to be scaled down, and it tells you here that a professional 2D FIR scaler will be used. What that means, I'm not 100% sure. Frame blending, frame downscaling. I put my frames per second in here. I always make masters at 48, and I'll deinterlace the video. Okay. All I then do is select the output path. It's ProRes 422 HQ, so I'm gonna, let's just get rid of this bit here, and I'm going to put HQ here, high quality. It is what is it, 1080p, and then I also include the 48 for the 48 frames per second. Okay, so that just tells me what this particular file is. I then press save, and now this program, this little plugin, is going to make my final film. It takes a short while, but what I'll do once it's finished is I'll then open it with QuickTime and just check it to make sure that the final film is fine. You can see here the final megabits per second is 360, which means, you know, the file size on this is going to be big, but you retain all the quality, all the information in the film, and use it for inclusion in all of the projects that you want to include it in, which is great. Anyway, I'm going to let this render, and you will see the finished item in a short while on the tutorial. Okay, so for the editing side of things, that's me for now. We'll pick this back up in the final tutorial. So I will see you over there. Cheers.